The year was 1966, a time when the world was grappling with its own mysteries, the space race, the Cold War, and the dawn of the counterculture. But far from the world's prying eyes, in the quiet hills of Brazil, a far more sinister mystery was brewing. It was the kind of enigma that would haunt those who dared to uncover it, a puzzle wrapped in fear and death. This is the story of two men, Miguel and Manuel, who ventured into the unknown and paid the ultimate price. What they found, or rather, what found them, remains shrouded in darkness, a tale that chills the bones and makes the skin crawl. Miguel and Manuel were ordinary men by all accounts. Both were electronics technicians, well-versed in the intricacies of circuits and waves. They had no history of mental illness, no ties to any criminal underworld. They were the kind of men you'd pass on the street without a second glance. But something changed. Something unseen pulled them into a world far beyond the ordinary. It all began with a trip to the Niterói Hill, known locally as Morro de Vintem. The hill, with its panoramic views of Rio de Janeiro, was a popular spot for hikers and nature enthusiasts. But on this particular day, August 20th, 1966, the hill would become the scene of a tragedy so bizarre that it defied all rational explanation. The bodies were discovered by a young boy flying his kite. At first, he thought they were just sleeping. Their bodies laid out on the grass, their hands folded neatly across their chests. But as he got closer, the smell hit him. An unmistakable stench of death, heavy and sickening. His scream echoed through the trees, a shrill cry that carried down the hill and into the nearby village. The authorities were quick to arrive, their black cars snaking up the narrow dirt road to the top of the hill. The scene they found was unlike anything they had ever encountered. Miguel and Manuel were dressed in identical formal suits, their bodies lying side by side as if in repose. But it was the masks that drew their attention. Strange, crude masks made of lead, covering their faces completely, leaving only the eyes exposed. Next to the bodies, a small notebook was found. It was this notebook that would set off a chain of events leading deeper and deeper into a nightmare. Inside, written in neat, almost mechanical handwriting, was a single line of text. 1630, be at the specified location. Take capsules after the effect. Protect metals await signal. The words were cryptic, almost nonsensical. But for the investigators, they were a puzzle, a deadly one, with pieces scattered across the country and beyond. The capsules? Protect metals? Await signal? What did it all mean? The autopsy reports would only deepen the mystery. There were no signs of violence, no marks on the bodies to indicate foul play. The only anomalies were the lead masks themselves and the absence of any signs of struggle. It was as if Miguel and Manuel had willingly placed the masks over their faces, laid down on the ground and simply died. But as the investigators would soon discover, the truth was far more terrifying than they could have imagined. There were whispers, hushed conversations in darkened rooms, tales of secret societies, alien contact, and rituals that defied the laws of nature. Miguel and Manuel had been searching for something that lurked in the shadows, something that had reached out to them from the depths of the unknown. And in their search, they had found it. Or perhaps it had found them. When the authorities first arrived at the scene, they were baffled. Two men, lying side by side on a quiet Brazilian hill, wearing identical suits and lead masks. Masks that seemed almost ritualistic, like something out of a nightmare. The cryptic note found beside them offered no solace, only more questions. 1630, be at the specified location. Take capsules after the effect. Protect metals await signal. What had these men gotten themselves into? What had they seen? As the investigation deepened, a strange picture began to form. A picture that seemed to defy all logic. Miguel and Manuel were not just ordinary men. They had been dabbling in the unknown, experimenting with things they barely understood. They had been members of a small, secretive group that believed in contacting higher beings. Beings from beyond the stars. The investigators followed the trail, interviewing friends, colleagues, and anyone who had known the two men. What they uncovered was a web of strange beliefs, bizarre experiments, and a growing obsession with what they called the signal. Miguel and Manuel had become convinced that they had been chosen, that they had been contacted by something otherworldly. They believed they were being guided to a higher plane of existence, a place where knowledge and power awaited them. But there was more, much more. A colleague revealed that in the weeks leading up to their deaths, both men had been acting erratically. They were secretive, often meeting in the dead of night to discuss their plans. They had started carrying strange objects, pieces of metal, wires, and devices that looked like they belonged in a science fiction novel. And then there were the capsules. Yes, the capsules. The investigators found traces of an unknown substance in their systems, something that the autopsy reports couldn't identify. Whatever it wasn't from this world, or at least it wasn't anything known to modern science. It was as if the men had ingested something meant to prepare them, to protect them, as the note had said. But protect them from what? And then there were the experiments. Miguel and Manuel had been building something that looked like a receiver or a transmitter. Their notebooks were filled with complex diagrams, mathematical equations, and references to something they called the field. They believed that by using these devices, they could tune into a frequency, a signal that would connect them to the beings they were trying to reach. But the more they delved into this, the more unhinged they became. Friends noticed the change, how their eyes seemed to grow hollow, how they spoke in whispers even when no one was around. They had become obsessed, convinced that they were on the verge of a breakthrough. They talked about the meeting, the day when they would finally make contact. August 20th, 1966. That was the day. The day they believed they would transcend, move beyond the physical world. The day they believed they would meet the beings who had been guiding them. They had prepared meticulously, following instructions that seemed to come from nowhere, or perhaps from somewhere far beyond. But something went terribly wrong. The investigators discovered that on the night before their deaths, Miguel and Manuel had been seen at a local bar. They were nervous, agitated. They drank quickly, talking in hushed tones. The bartender remembered one thing clearly. Just before they left, Miguel turned to Manuel and said, "It's time. We have to be ready for the signal." The bodies were found the next day. No signs of struggle, no signs of pain. Just two men lying side by side, their faces hidden behind those eerie lead masks. And that note, still clutched in Miguel's hand. Protect metals await signal. But there was no signal. No transcendent experience. Only death. The investigators were left with more questions than answers. What had they been trying to protect? What signal had they been waiting for? And why had they believed so fervently that they would be taken somewhere beyond this world? But this was only the beginning. The deeper the investigators dug, the more they realized that Miguel and Manuel were not the only ones who had been listening. There were others who believed in the signal, who had been waiting for it, who still were. And as the authorities would soon discover, this case was about to take a turn into the truly terrifying. The truth was out there, waiting in the darkness, and it was far more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. In the quiet aftermath of the initial investigation, the case of the lead masks seemed destined to remain unsolved. But as days turned into weeks, strange occurrences began to surface. Disturbances that hinted at something far darker lurking beneath the surface. Miguel and Manuel were not just victims of a tragic experiment gone wrong. They were part of a much larger, more sinister conspiracy. One that reached into the very heart of darkness. The investigation took a chilling turn when the lead masks, those crude, heavy coverings that had concealed the men's faces, were analyzed further. The material was ordinary enough. Lead, used perhaps to shield them from some kind of radiation or unknown energy. But it wasn't the masks themselves that raised alarm. It was what was found etched inside them. On the interior of each mask, investigators discovered intricate carvings, symbols that no one could decipher, strange geometric patterns intertwined with what appeared to be runes or an ancient script. These were no random markings. They seemed deliberate, purposeful. But what did they mean? And who or what had placed them there? Further inquiries revealed something even more disturbing. Miguel and Manuel were not alone in their beliefs, nor in their actions. There were others, scattered across Brazil and beyond, who had been conducting similar experiments. People who believed in the signal, who had built similar devices, and who were convinced that they were on the brink of a monumental discovery. One such individual, an elderly woman who had been in contact with the two men, claimed she knew what the symbols meant. She spoke of an ancient society, a group that had existed in the shadows for centuries, dedicated to reaching out to otherworldly beings. They were known as the Keepers of the Gate, and they believed they had found a way to communicate with entities not of this earth. The woman told the investigators about the ritual. It was said to be a process, a series of steps that had to be followed with absolute precision to open the gate, to connect with the beings who existed on the other side. The capsules, the masks, the specific time and place, all were part of this ritual. But she warned that the gate was not merely a portal to another dimension. It was a door, and not everything that came through was friendly. The more the investigators learned, the more they realized they were dealing with forces far beyond their understanding. Reports began to surface, strange lights in the sky, people disappearing without a trace, and those who survived speaking of visions, of encounters with beings of light, and of something darker, something that fed on fear and despair. One night, one of the lead detectives, a man named Carvalho, received a call. It was the elderly woman again, her voice trembling with fear. She told him she had seen something that had come through the gate. She described a shadowy figure, tall and thin with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. She said it had followed her, watched her, and now it was inside her house. Carvalho rushed to her home, but when he arrived, it was too late. The door was ajar, the house in disarray. The woman was nowhere to be found, but there were signs of a struggle. Furniture overturned, scratch marks on the walls, and most chilling of all, the same symbols from the lead masks, drawn in what appeared to be blood, covering every surface. Carvalho knew he was in over his head, but he couldn't stop now. He began to dig deeper into the history of the Keepers of the Gate, uncovering records of other mysterious deaths, all connected by the same symbols, the same rituals. It became clear that Miguel and Manuel had been part of something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. They hadn't just been trying to communicate with otherworldly beings, they had been trying to summon them. As Carvalho pieced together the puzzle, he realized the horrifying truth. The gate had been opened, and something had come through. Something that was now hunting those who had called it. And worse, it seemed to be spreading, infecting others with its dark influence. But the final piece of the puzzle, the most terrifying revelation, was still to come. There was one last entry in Miguel's notebook, written in a shaky hand as if in his final moments. It read, "The signal was wrong. We called them. But they are not what we thought. We have unleashed something terrible. The masks do not protect us. It is coming for us all." Carvalho knew that time was running out. Whatever had been unleashed was growing stronger, and it was only a matter of time before it claimed more victims. But how could he stop something that defied all logic? Something that was no longer of this world? The terror had only just begun. The full horror of what Miguel and Manuel had unleashed was about to be revealed, and it would be more horrifying than anyone could have ever imagined. The truth was out there, hidden within the shadows of the past, buried beneath layers of secrecy and fear. But as the investigators pushed forward, the horrors that had been lurking just out of sight began to reveal themselves in full. The events that had unfolded on that hill in 1966 were only the beginning, a prelude to something far more sinister, something that defied all understanding. And now, as the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place, the true extent of the terror was about to be unleashed. Detective Carvalho was no longer alone in his investigation. A small team of experts had joined him, specialists in the occult, in ancient languages, and in the dark arts. Together, they began to unravel the final, most horrifying chapter of the lead masks case. What they discovered was more chilling than anything they could have imagined. The elderly woman's disappearance had left behind a trove of documents, ancient texts, diaries, and more of those strange, indecipherable symbols. But it wasn't until Carvalho found the woman's final journal entry, hidden in a secret compartment beneath her floorboards, that the full horror became clear. The entry described a ritual, an ancient forbidden rite that the Keepers of the Gate had practiced for centuries. The ritual was designed to open a portal, a gateway between our world and another, one inhabited by beings of immense power. But these beings were not benevolent. They were malevolent entities, creatures that thrived on fear, suffering, and death. The ritual required a sacrifice, a willing offering to the darkness in exchange for knowledge and power. Miguel and Manuel had been misled. They believed they were contacting a higher intelligence, but in reality, they were calling forth something far darker. The capsules they had taken were not meant to protect them. They were meant to subdue them, to make them docile, obedient to the will of the beings they had summoned. The lead masks were not shields but symbols of their submission. As the team continued their investigation, they began to experience strange phenomena, objects moving on their own, cold spots that seemed to follow them, and the constant feeling of being watched. Carvalho started seeing things out of the corner of his eye, dark shapes, flitting shadows, and once the glowing eyes the elderly woman had described. But it wasn't until they conducted a seance in the house, hoping to contact the spirits of Miguel and Manuel, that they realized the true nature of what they were dealing with. The seance was a disaster. As they attempted to communicate with the dead, the room grew cold, the lights flickered, and then all at once, everything went dark. In the pitch black, a voice spoke. Not from the spirit of the men, but from something else. Something ancient and evil. It whispered in a language none of them understood, but the tone was unmistakable. Threatening, mocking, filled with malice. When the lights returned, one of the team members was gone. His chair was overturned, and there was no sign of struggle. Only the symbols. Those same eerie symbols scrawled in blood on the walls. Panic set in. They had to leave, had to get out of that house, but the front door wouldn't budge. The windows were sealed tight as if something had trapped them inside. Carvalho realized then that the ritual had not ended with the deaths of Miguel and Manuel. It had only begun. By investigating the case, by delving into the secrets of the Keepers of the Gate, they had become part of the ritual themselves. The entity they had summoned was now here, with them, feeding on their fear, growing stronger with every passing moment. Desperate, Carvalho turned to the journal, searching for any way to reverse the ritual, to send the entity back to where it came from. But the answer was as horrifying as the ritual itself. The only way to close the gate was through a sacrifice, a willing offering to the darkness. Someone had to give themselves to the entity, to satisfy its hunger, or it would continue to grow in power until it could no longer be contained. The team argued, fear gripping them as the reality of their situation set in. But before they could reach a decision, the entity made it for them. The lights flickered again, and in that brief moment of darkness, another team member vanished, their screams echoing through the house. The symbols on the walls began to glow, pulsing with a sickly light, and the air grew thick with the stench of decay. Carvalho knew what he had to do. The entity had been drawn to him, had marked him from the beginning. It had taken the others, but it was him it truly wanted. He had been the one to dig too deep, to uncover the secrets that should have remained buried. With a heavy heart, he told the remaining team members to leave, to save themselves, and then he walked into the center of the room, where the symbols glowed the brightest. As he stood there, he felt the entity's presence all around him, cold, dark, and overwhelming. The glowing eyes appeared before him, and he could feel its hunger, its desire to consume him. But as he closed his eyes, he spoke the final words from the journal, the incantation that would seal the gate, even at the cost of his own life. There was a blinding flash of light, and for a moment, Carvalho felt as if he were being pulled apart, his very essence consumed by the darkness. But then, just as suddenly, it was over. The room was silent, the air clear. The symbols had vanished, and the door creaked open, revealing the night beyond. The remaining team members found Carvalho's body lying in the center of the room, his face calm, almost peaceful. But as they approached, they saw something that made their blood run cold. Etched into his skin, just below his collarbone, were the same symbols, the ones that had haunted them from the beginning. The entity was gone, but it had left its mark, a reminder that it was never truly defeated, only waiting for the next opportunity to return. And so, the lead mask's case was closed, the truth buried once again. But the story did not end there. Whispers began to spread, of strange lights in the sky, of people hearing voices in the night, of those who had encountered the symbols and had been marked by them. The gate had been closed, but the darkness still lingered, waiting, always waiting. The lead masks were just the beginning, and somewhere, in the shadows, the entity watches and waits, biding its time until the gate is opened once more.